I've got a journal with me video to share today, and this one is for Junk Journal July 2024. It's lovely to be asked back, thank you Meg, and it's lovely to be amongst a whole bunch of amazing creators who are making videos for each of the prompts, and also everyone who's participating and sharing their stuff on the hashtag and things like that. There's lots of creativity going around, and it's always lovely to be part of that. So yeah, it's lovely to be involved. So my prompt was thread, and those of you who have seen my stuff before will be unsurprised that that's what I picked. Meg certainly wasn't. She was like, I knew you'd go for that one. I love putting, stitching and fabric and stuff in my journals. I'm a fabric crafter and quilter and embroiderer from way back, so that finds its way into my journals a lot, more often than not, I would say. So yeah, this was a good one to go with. When I was thinking about the prompt, I sort of wanted to think about it from a metaphorical perspective as well as a literal perspective, right? When I come to a project like this and I'm thinking about how I want to interpret the prompt, I like to give myself lots of room to think about different interpretations before I commit to anything, just so that I can let the prompt surprise me or lead me somewhere where I otherwise might not have gone. I always find that a fruitful part of that process. So yeah, I was thinking about like the threads of connection between people, things like relationships and bonds. I was thinking about following the thread of a thought or a conversation or a story, and how I might represent that. And that got me thinking about a book that I'd been reading recently, which is about Greek mythology. And then I started thinking about Arachne, who is one of the stories that I read in there, the story of Arachne, she was a weaver, she was a mortal, not one of the gods, and Athena had heard about how good she was, and she challenged her to a weave off, and it did not go well for Arachne. By the end, she had been turned into a spider, and that's why we call spiders arachnids. That's their scientific name, as reference to that story. So I was sort of thinking about that story, and that's where I ended up kind of taking this page. So I opened up my little journal, which I have made for this challenge for July. I was making this in advance, obviously, so I haven't got any other pages filled yet. I went straight to the one that I was making this video for. And I had this one that had lots of little butterfly and moth wings on it, and that seemed thematically linked to the idea of spiders and webs. So I thought that would be a good place to put it. And then I got a bit of this muslin, which was just a scrap that I had lying around, and I decided to stick that to the page. I knew I wanted to stitch on it, and I thought that this would add a little bit of stability to the page, and also some texture and like an interesting visual element as well. I used matte gel medium, and I just sort of spread that onto the paper with, it's like a spatula type application thing. It's made of like silicone, so it's nice and bendy, so you can get it nicely smoothed over there. And then I put the muslin on top, and I allowed that to dry. So I set that aside it ended up being overnight, I think, in the end. It wouldn't necessarily take that long, but just that's how long it took, because I wandered off and did something else and, got distracted and came back the next day. I think it was a while anyway. And so the next thing that I wanted to do is actually put on the, the main motif that I want this page to have on it. And I'm going to use one of my favourite techniques. It's a collaging thing that I do quite a lot of. And I use recycled or just salvaged paper, and I paint on it with gouache, and then I cut it out to create collages. So basically it's like you're painting, but you're not painting, because it's cut out of the painted colours that you've made, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but you'll see. So I wanted to have a bit of an idea of the rough shape that was going to go on the page. So I put a bit of scrap paper on there, and I did a little rough pencil drawing for the main outline. And I'm just using that as a guide as I cut the rest of the pieces. So these are very fine, fiddly little pieces of twig. I wanted to get give the sense of like a kind of like a dead twig, shrub, bush type thing that the spider web would be spun in. So that's what I'm doing here with these very fine pieces of paper that I've painted in various shades of brown. I'm trying to pay attention to the colours in that I want the darker browns to be where I would expect shadow to be, and then the lighter browns to be where I would expect light to be, just to give it a bit of depth and give it the sense of there being a little bit of three-dimensionality to it. But I'm not stressing too much about that. Like, that's like a rough guide, but it's certainly not something that I'm trying to be super accurate about. So I put the main structure of those branches on there, and now I'm using a pencil on the reverse side of the paper just to roughly sketch out the shape of the spider's web that I want to stitch on here. So this was a little bit tricky because spiders' webs, you think you know how they look, and then you actually look at some and you go, wow, they're actually a lot different to sort of the stylized idea of it that I have in my brain. So yeah, I sort of roughly sketched out where the stitching was going to go, and as you can see, I've put a bit of tape in the center of it there. I'm going to be stitching it with just some embroidery floss. I've got 2 strands of it there, and I knew that at the center of the spider web there would be a place where I was piercing the paper, where I would be threading through it a few times, and I didn't think the paper was going to be strong enough to handle the thread pulling in and out of it as many times as I needed to at that central point. So I put a bit of it's basically just like plain white washi tape over it, just to give it a little bit more stability again than it was getting just from the muslin. And the next thing I'm doing is just stitching. So the pencil lines on the back are actually just a guideline, so that I get the overall shape of it right. And I'm just going to go through, and I'm using tape also to stitch, to hold down the end of the thread on the opposite side of the paper. And yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch this little guy. The stitching portion is complete, and I'm ready to continue to sort of add to this page. So the first thing that I wanted to do was actually add some journaling, and I wanted to do that on the facing page. I didn't want to cover up too much of the detail that was happening there, so I chose some paper that was sort of translucent, and I was just doing a bit of reflection on that story of Arachne. And what did I write? I wrote, I was reading the story of Arachne and thinking about how petty those ancient gods were, and I wondered how the Greeks could worship them so devoutly. I see that it was a way of making sense of an unkind and often unpredictable world, but even still, how do you get from explaining it with capricious and cruel beings to worshipping those beings? I wondered if they conceived of the gods to give themselves something to push back at and rebel against. If Arachne's story says anything to me now, it's let the gods believe they are punishing us so long as we get to keep weaving. So yeah, there seemed something kind of ironic. I don't know if ironic's actually the word, but the idea of turning Arachne into a spider because she was so good at weaving seemed like punishing her with something that she actually loved, and maybe she wasn't that punished after all. Maybe she actually got to live happily ever after, doing the thing that gave her the most joy. I don't know. That's certainly open to interpretation. So yeah, I wanted to add some more branches and twigs to what I had there already on the page. I wanted to have the basic kind of shape of it before I did the stitching so that I could make sure it fit in properly, but then I wanted to add some more to fill it out a little bit. It's quite fun and free form for me, and I really enjoy it. When I had put as many twigs on as I wanted to, the page still didn't feel properly finished. I don't know, it just felt a little bit empty. So I put on a few little transfer sticker things, and they were kind of texty. And then I got out these beautiful paints that my wife got me a while ago. They're so lovely and shiny, and I'm obsessed with them. So I wanted to add, normally when a page doesn't feel complete, I'll add some like splatters of paint or ink or something just to help fill it out. But because I've put fabric on there, fabric kind of wicks anything that's wet. So if I had put splatters of paint on there, it would have just kind of spread out and been absorbed by that muslin, and it wouldn't have sat the way that I wanted it to. It might have spread out and looked quite sort of blotchy and messy. I wasn't sure how it would go, but I was pretty sure it wouldn't look great. So instead of just putting splatters on the way I normally would, I sort of carefully put some around the edges, and I added some to the branches just to connect that sort of top part of the page with the bottom part of the page. So it looked like there was sort of a through line with those little splatters. Having a difficult time explaining that, but hopefully it makes sense. So I put those on there, and that was pretty much the page. I really hope you like it. I hope that you are enjoying Junk Journal July so far, and everybody else's beautiful creations. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.